South Carolina rewards nature lovers with a rare kind of variety. Primeval floodplain forest and misty mountains, salt marshes stitched with tidal creeks, and sea islands where the beach meets a living laboratory of wind, waves, and wildlife. To understand this state through its landscapes is to trace a story written by water and time, rivers that wander and overflow, barrier islands that migrate, and an escarpment where the Piedmont lifts into the Blue Ridge. This guide follows 15 standout places anchored by 4 emblematic regions and parks: Congaree, the Lowcountry Marshes, Hunting Island, and Table Rock, then branching outward to show how the pieces connect. Begin in the middle of the state, where the Congaree River gathers the waters of the Broad and the Saluda, and then slows into a floodplain that feels older than the map. Congaree National Park protects the largest remaining tract of old-growth bottomland hardwood forest in the United States. Old growth here doesn't mean untouched. People have lived, hunted, and traveled these rivers for thousands of years. But it does mean a forest that escaped the saw when most of the Southeast's great hardwood bottoms were logged. The result is an ecosystem built for extremes. In dry spells, boardwalk trails pass through cathedral-like stands of bald cypress and water tupelo, their flared bases adapted for saturated soils. After heavy rain, the same forest becomes a shallow inland sea, and the park's creeks, Cedar Creek is the most famous, turn into quiet paddling routes beneath a canopy that seems to float. Congaree's signature experience is the elevated boardwalk, an easy route that introduces the floodplain without demanding backcountry skills. But the park's personality emerges most fully on the water. A canoe or kayak on Cedar Creek slides past knees of cypress, through corridors of buttonbush and swamp palmetto, with barred owls calling from somewhere you can't quite locate. In late spring and early summer, Congaree hosts one of the most celebrated natural events in the Southeast: synchronous fireflies. For a few weeks, certain firefly species coordinate their flashes, turning the understory into a pulsing constellation. The park manages viewing carefully because the spectacle is fragile. Light pollution and foot traffic can disrupt it, so planning ahead matters. Another practical note: mosquitoes are not a footnote here. They are part of the food web, and they can be intense. Long sleeves, repellent, and a sense of humor go a long way. From the inland floodplain, follow the water south and east toward the Lowcountry, where rivers broaden into estuaries and the Atlantic tide becomes the metronome. The Lowcountry marshes are not just scenery. They are one of North America's most productive ecosystems. Salt marsh grasses, especially smooth cordgrass, form green plains that flood and drain twice daily. That rhythm feeds shrimp, crabs, oysters, and juvenile fish, which in turn feed wading birds, dolphins, and people. The marsh is also a cultural landscape. The Gullah Geechee communities of the Sea Islands and coastal plain preserved African languages and traditions through centuries of enslavement and isolation. And the local cuisine, rice, seafood, okra, bene seed, still carries those roots. Even the geometry of the coast tells a human story. Old rice fields, diked and ditched in the 18th and 19th centuries, now sit as ghostly grids beside tidal creeks, reclaimed by Spartina and egrets. For a close look at the Lowcountry's tidal world, the Ace Basin, named for the Ashpoo, Combahee, and Edisto rivers, offers a sweeping, protected estuary landscape of marsh, maritime forest, and former plantation lands now managed for wildlife. It's a place where you can watch roseate spoonbills and wood storks in the right season, or scan for alligators in brackish creeks where fresh and salt water mingle. The best approach is slow travel, a wildlife drive, a short walk to a viewing platform, a guided paddle at slack tide when currents relax. In the Lowcountry, timing matters as much as destination. Check tide charts the way you'd check weather in the mountains. The same creek can be a broad highway at high tide and a mud-flat maze a few hours later. Now step onto the coast's outer edge at Hunting Island State Park near Beaufort, where the Atlantic is actively rearranging the shoreline. Hunting Island is a barrier island, and barrier islands are not fixed land masses. They are sand in motion, migrating with storms, currents, and sea level changes. The park's maritime forest, live oaks, palmettos, and pines, stands behind dunes that act as the first line of defense. When hurricanes and nor'easters cut into those dunes, trees can topple and beaches can shift dramatically. Rather than fighting the ocean everywhere, the park offers a front-row seat to coastal dynamics. Hunting Island's lighthouse is the park's most recognizable landmark, and it carries a story of war and rebuilding. The original lighthouse was destroyed during the Civil War. The current structure dates to the post-war era, built in the 1870s. Climbing it gives you a geography lesson in every direction. The scalloped shoreline, the marshes behind the island, and the chain of sea islands stretching along the horizon. On the beach, look for loggerhead sea turtle tracks in nesting season. Nesting is protected and monitored. And for shorebirds working the surf line. In the lagoon and marsh edges, you might spot fiddler crabs waving oversized claws like tiny semaphore flags. Practical tips here are simple and important. Bring sun protection, drink more water than you think you need, and respect closures around dunes and nests. On a barrier island, the most scenic shortcut can also be the most damaging. South Carolina's nature story doesn't end at the coast. Drive northwest, and the land rises steadily into the Blue Ridge, where waterfalls spill off the escarpment and granite outcrops break through hardwood forest. Table Rock State Park, near the town of Pickens, is a classic mountain anchor. The park's namesake, Table Rock Mountain, is a massive, flat-topped granite dome that dominates the skyline. The trails here are a different kind of immersion than Congaree's boardwalk or the Lowcountry's tidal creeks. They ask for steady climbing, careful footing, and attention to weather. In return, they offer long views across the Piedmont and, on clear days, a sense of how sharply South Carolina transitions from coastal plain to high country. Table Rock's historic significance includes its role in early conservation and New Deal-era park development. Like many state parks, it bears the imprint of the Civilian Conservation Corps, whose crews built trails, shelters, and stonework that still shape the visitor experience. Hike the Table Rock Summit Trail for a strenuous, rewarding route, or choose shorter paths around the park's lakes and streams if you want the mountain atmosphere without the steep ascent. In spring, the slopes can flare with mountain laurel and azalea. In autumn, the hardwoods turn the ridgelines into layered bands of copper and gold. Bring layers even in warm months. Mountain weather can shift quickly, and start early to avoid afternoon thunderstorms and crowded trailheads. With those 4 anchors in mind, the rest of South Carolina's best nature stops fall into place like chapters in a single book. In the mountains, Jones Gap State Park and Caesar's Head State Park form a paired gateway to the rugged escarpment. Jones Gap is famous for clear streams and waterfall hikes through dense forest, while Caesar's Head offers dramatic overlooks and, in migration season, hawk watching as raptors ride rising air along the ridges. Nearby, the Chattooga River, protected as a wild and scenic river, cuts through remote terrain and is renowned for whitewater and the kind of backcountry feel that's increasingly rare in the east. Still in the upstate, the Jocassee Gorges region, centered on Lake Jocassee and the surrounding protected lands, delivers a blend of deep, clear water and hidden waterfalls. Some cascades are best reached by boat, which turns a day on the lake into a treasure hunt for plunging streams and cool coves. Move back toward the center of the state and you find a different suite of waterscapes. Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie, created in the 20th century as part of a hydroelectric project, now form the heart of Santee Cooper country. Their flooded forests and cypress stands support abundant birdlife and excellent fishing. Not far away, the Francis Marion National Forest offers longleaf pine ecosystems, a habitat once widespread across the southeast and now greatly reduced. In longleaf country, fire is not an enemy, it's a management tool. Controlled burns maintain an open, sunlit understory that supports species like the red-cockaded woodpecker, which depends on mature pines. Closer to the coast, Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge protects a chain of barrier islands and salt marshes north of Charleston, critical for migratory birds and sea turtle nesting. Bull's Island, accessible by ferry, is a standout for beach walks and birding. It's also a reminder that much of the coast is still wild if you're willing to travel a little farther and accept fewer amenities. Charleston itself, famous for architecture and history, also sits beside remarkable natural spaces. The marshes and tidal creeks around the city, places like the Stono River area, offer kayaking routes where dolphins sometimes surface in the same frame as church steeples in the distance. This is one of South Carolina's signature contrasts, centuries-old human landscapes set against ecosystems that operate on tidal time. If you want to understand the state's geology, add a stop at Lansford Canal State Park near the Catawba River, known for its rocky shoals and, in late spring, a spectacular bloom of spider lilies, white flowers that appear in clusters along rushing water. It's a seasonal event worth planning around, and it highlights how even a small park can hold a globally uncommon natural phenomenon. For a different coastal texture, Edisto Beach State Park offers a calmer, less built-up beach experience with maritime forest trails and access to tidal creeks. It's a good counterpoint to the more exposed drama of Hunting Island, and it pairs naturally with a visit to nearby wetlands and oak-lined roads that hint at the Lowcountry's plantation-era past. And then there are the places that combine nature with layered human history. Beaufort's coastal setting, for example, is inseparable from the Sea Island's cultural heritage, Reconstruction-era stories, and the ongoing relationship between fishing communities and the estuary. In the Lowcountry, the landscape is never merely scenic. It is working water, working marsh, and memory. To travel South Carolina for nature is to travel by ecosystems. Pack for humidity and sudden rain in the lowlands, and for cooler temperatures and steep grades in the upstate. Learn the basic etiquette of sensitive habitats. Stay off dunes. Keep a respectful distance from wildlife, and clean your boots or boat gear when moving between waterways to reduce the spread of invasive species. Let the calendar guide you. Spring brings wildflowers in the mountains and spider lilies on certain rivers. Summer brings fireflies in Congaree and sea turtle nesting along the coast. Autumn brings migration along ridgelines and comfortable temperatures for long hikes. Winter opens clear views through leafless forests and makes marsh walks pleasantly bug-light. If you remember only one unifying idea, let it be this. South Carolina's landscapes are shaped by movement. Rivers flood and recede, tides advance and withdraw, barrier islands shift under storm pressure, and mountains weather grain by grain into the valleys below. Visit Congaree to feel the power of floodwater to build a forest. Visit the Lowcountry Marshes to witness the daily pulse that feeds an entire coast. Climb Hunting Island's lighthouse to see land that the ocean still negotiates with. Hike Table Rock to stand on ancient granite and look out across a state that changes dramatically from one horizon to the next. Each place offers its own kind of silence, its own kind of life, and its own way of teaching you where you are.